Well, let's start with the one that could be the most spicy one. An obvious one is Team Liquid, I think. With where they're at right now, the crisis I guess they find themselves in. There's other teams out there who can overtake them.
No, I'm actually going to disagree with you on this one. Here's why. Right, we're back for another episode of Counterpoints. This will be the last one before the major has begun, because obviously it begins next week. We're on stage one. Now, we said in the last episode we were going to do like who are the favourites, who can win the tournament, if not Vitality. I think we did a pretty good job laying out those teams. What we'll do is, since it's stage one, I always make this point, basically, ever since last year when they introduced VRS. I actually think a lot of the what you would call in English like the quibbles or the things that people are annoyed about with VRS, they're actually in the one area that's not as big a deal. They're at the very bottom of the qualification system, or they're things that were actually already existed anyway in CSGO before we had VRS, like how many slots should each region get? How do we decide who gets the slots? Like those things, I understand. Certainly there's issues there. It's not ideal. But one thing I've been making the point to people, because I'm actually genuinely really grateful this exists, is if you actually look how VRS has worked for qualifying, let's say, like, I don't know, the top 20 teams that go to the major or something. It's done a really good job. It's got all the teams we want. Also, then if you add in using it as a system for the major and dividing up these three stages, it looks like it's doing an amazing job, Pimp. Like, the joke is the only way you can even disagree with any of them. I'll give you an example. Obviously, like, Gamer Legion, for example, just made a, like, really cool run at the last couple of events. But that was, right, first of all, that was way after everyone qualified to the major. That was just very, very recently. So aside from one like that, like, maybe some people would want them in stage 2 or in stage 3, who knows, right? But aside from that, I think if you look now, true, for some people it's probably made the major less sexy because there's no world now where you can look at stage 1 and see, remember some of the crazy ones back in the day, stage 1 could have like FaZe Clan in, like we could have like really famous teams. Now it looks like it's way more reasonable. Like to me it actually looks like the stages make sense. So in light of that, stage 1 obviously isn't the sexiest one. It's the one with a lot of the smaller names, a lot of the tier 2 names, a lot of the teams that played in those little lands at the end of the VRS to qualify, etc. So for this one, obviously we're not really expecting any teams to win the major, etc. But I think what we'll do is, everyone's done their pick'em anyway. We'll do something a little bit like that. Let's just pick out teams we think are interesting, or they have some element to them, or some angle that maybe people haven't thought of. So pick one, Pimp. Which one from this opening field would you like to talk about?
Well, let's start with the one that could be the most spicy one. An obvious one is Team Liquid, I think. With where they're at right now, the crisis I guess they find themselves in, the fact that they remind me of a soulless team, and the fact that they haven't done anything with neither the former lineup, with Nerds, changed, brought in Leash, think to yourself, that's going to be great. Didn't really work out, hasn't really worked out. Then you bring in Malps instead of Nerds, and you think, okay, maybe that's gonna reignite some fire within Team Liquid, or maybe Shuei is gonna figure it out, or maybe he get a player now that slots in differently, that opens up more space for some of the other guys to express themselves. But it's honestly, if you look at it's puzzling, because if you look at the track history of what Liquid have done in terms of changes, I think a lot of the names make sense, and a lot of the changes make sense on paper, where I'm like, okay, this should be okay. Bringing back Elise was a no-brainer. That should be all right. He's gonna guarantee you a certain output, and he's gonna guarantee that you stay at least somewhat relevant. But Liquid even being at the major is not even up to them. That's by luck. That's by the fact that they brought in Malps instead of Nerds. They then qualified through the NA portion of the major qualifiers, and then they were relying on one or two other results going their way. At the end of the day, it wasn't even them, winning enough games or doing enough within the NA region to even guarantee themselves to be at the major. So I think obviously it goes without saying, there's a lot of pressure on Team Liquid, but I'm also now, at a point where it's like, okay, Shuhei, what exactly have you done outside of, bringing up Mouse NXT and then joining Mouse and doing a good job with Mouse? Because essentially when they got rid of Shuhei, they brought in Brolan. Some would argue they got even better, So, and do we rate Brolan to be a top tier in-game leader? Not really. Then you see what Shuhei has done in Team Liquid. Nothing whatsoever. How much is that Liquid? How much is the player material he has to work with? How much is it the culture? I don't know. And I'm getting to the point now where I guess that's my point. I look at Team Liquid and I don't know how to rate them. I don't know how to rate the players. I don't know how to rate the team outside of stating the obvious, that it's a team with a lot of name value, but nothing to show for. Same goes for Elish. He's off to the worst start he's had in his entire career from a stats perspective. Hasn't found his footing. whatsoever on Team Liquid. And then the one player that is actually doing his job, is Nefline, the one that we wanted, everyone wanted cut, 6-8 months ago, where he was in a big crisis, and he, arguably played terrible. He even said it himself, if I were Team Liquid, I would cut me. Well, he's the most stable player now, and he's the one who's actually delivering in terms of his position, in terms of his output, and it's just when I look at Liquid, and I don't know how you feel about it. Nothing makes sense. It's not that one or two players doesn't make sense. It's not that one or two aspects of the game doesn't make sense. It's not like they're losing close games where you're like, oh, if you could just get over the hurdle. It's like I look at FaZe Clan, and I think their crisis is like, yeah, that's water on the bridge. That's fine. They're gonna figure it out. Whereas for Team Liquid, I have no freaking clue where to start. I'm like, at this point, I could cut 4 players from the team and rebuild. Whereas for FaZe, at least you got Frozen, at least you got Twist, at least you got something to work with. I don't even know where to assess Team Liquid anymore. And I even have them in my pick'ems making it through because I refuse to believe you can have that much, experience and talent in stage 1, as you said, not the most sexy list of teams maybe. I refuse to believe that it can be that bad, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they somehow, some way find a way not to make it to stage 2.
Okay, you've given me an interesting piece of framing there because believe it or not, Pimp, if you look historically, especially because of people like Elise or even when they had Twist, he's an excellent player. He's one of the all-time greats. Snaf is probably at times been underrated. Also, he plays like not the greatest spots always, etc. If you look historically, Liquid's one of my biases, mate, in the same ways it was FaZe when they had Carrigan or teams that have Simplon, Eco, people like that, actually I would say over the years, I'm someone who was like pretty loyal to Liquid in the sense that like when they had that roster last year, I did think every time they made a roster, like, this could be it. Like, I think some of these other players are good. I think in general, you've done a decent job recruiting them. Eventually, you're going to get the culture fit, right? Eventually, you're going to figure out the identity. I even thought when they brought the coach in, maybe that's it. Maybe what you really need was a coach. Remember in that team, after they had Daps, they had that weird period where they just had that analyst, Demar DeRosa or whatever the fuck, who they put him in the position to be the coach for like 6 months or whatever it was. So what's funny is, this is a sign, by the way, of how bad things have gotten to Liquid, because you at the end said there, what normally would be my default position, which is like, even so, after all that, I can't look at these names and think they're not going to even make it through stage 1 of the major. But in the same way as in the past, look, in stage 1 of the major last year, I did take FaZe to get through because it was FaZe, for fuck's sake. But in the same way as people will notice, at the end, when FaZe was going downhill this year, I was pretty ruthless, even though I used to be a mega FaZe defender, because I just decided eventually, like, I'm hopping off this train, like, this isn't going anywhere, mate. If anything, it's going off a cliff, mate, and I'm not coming with it. So, sorry, this is the moment I'm doing that for Liquid, because I've criticised them anyway, but I'll tell you what, Pimp, I didn't put them going through in my pick'em. Yeah. And the reason why, for real, is because when I did that simulator, where you look at what the possible matches, I do always tell people they do overrate that, because if you get even 1 or 2 B or 1 upsets, which are very likely to happen, it does change the simulator, obviously. But if you ever look at who they're likely to play, I'm not even trolling. A bunch of those games, I couldn't actually take them, both in the veto and just looking at recent form. I couldn't take them to win, even though part of my brain was like, it's Liquid, bro, come on. Because some of them, right, believe it or not, when you're playing against, even by the way, when you're playing people like Tyler, I actually can't anymore actually take that as a given win for Team Liquid, mate. Like, true. If you've actually watched the last few months, it's gotten really bad. Like, I always tell people this, right? Here's what sucks about Liquid right now. It's not even just that they don't win the games and, the stats have all dropped. One of the worst features they have as a team, bro, is they're one of the most identity-less squads I've ever seen in Counter-Strike. Yeah. Like, if you ever watched them play, I saw Steeko did a criticism video of this, because obviously he's branched out into the analysis world. Bro, you'll be shocked. Like, Steeko actually goes fairly fucking, like, harsh in the paint on them, because if you ever watch them, right, it's not even like you're just making mistakes. Sometimes they're doing shit, like, from a bad matchmaking game, mate, like you can tell 2 people were supposed to run out on mid on Ancient and take the duel, and then one just baits the other one. Might be Elise, might be stuff like that, like almost like borderline abusive teammate behaviour, where it's like you would think a coach or a captain of the team would just sit you down after that and just go like, don't ever do that again. Like, play as a team, we all together. But they just don't have that. So I actually do worry, unfortunately. I made this prediction about Falcons in the past before they got Carrigan. I used to worry that some of the weird sloppy mistakes and things that you shouldn't normally have at tier 1 that you saw in the team were actually a sign that people, again, didn't think of themselves as, we're a Counter-Strike team, here's our identity, here's we'll win. They were more thinking of it as like, I don't want to lose this job and I don't want to be the one that makes the mistakes, so I'm just going to play really, essentially, I'd say careful, but even though they're making mistakes, I mean sort of like not buy in with each other, don't do shit like that, like bait each other or not go at the same time or go 1 second after the call. So that part is really disturbing to me, because I've got to say, yes, that combined with the stats means I'm with you, mate. After this major, the second this major finishes, I'm Team Liquid, and I'm not just saying which player do I replace. I'm doing that thing as if it's the off-season, mate. I'm getting a whiteboard out. I'm writing down our 5 players' names and the coach's name. I'm probably crossing 2 or 3 of those names off when I figure out which ones I'm getting rid of, including that. Notice I put in there, the coach could be in there potentially if I think I can get someone else. And I'm out, like, because right now, this team, they've obviously done it that way. You can't just add one and then hope that fixes the team. At the moment, it doesn't look like any one is going to fix the team. Like, remember, the order they even went in makes it seem like that can't happen. Because if people remember the order people joined it out of the people in the team now, they got Shuhei when the old Liquid was a bunch of star names, a bit like now, but it wasn't performance. Everyone thought, all right, Shuhei, he's in IGL. Yeah, think about it, right? He was in Mouse, he did all that. This is perfect. He's going to turn it around. If anything, they got worse since he joined, unfortunately. Then you could have argued, I wouldn't argue this, but you could have made this case. Well, you know what? They let Twists be the IGL and sort of the captain of the team. Yeah, he's a really good player individually, but he's the only one playing well. Maybe it's something to do with he doesn't buy in himself. He doesn't believe we want to be here. Well, you know what? They swapped him out. Elish came back. If they've gotten worse, if anything. In fact, Elish himself has got worse. That's even one part right there, by the way, where for Elish, he could be on the chopping block too. The main thing I think you have to identify with Elish is, did he get worse due to something within the team component? Because that's a bit weird, isn't it? Like, he was way better in call and phase even. So it seems a bit strange that he's gotten so much worse. But at the same time, if fixing him, because who knows how good he's going to be, even if he's in top form, fixing him requires getting, like, some ridiculous amount of other players, and maybe he has to go too. That's to be on the table at least. Although for that one at least, I wouldn't gamble like a lot of people I've heard talking would, because again, I would always say the thing of like, it's like the opposite. It's like, who we get instead though? Do you have a rifle that at the peak level can be better than Leash? Again, if you can figure one out, we can do it. So what I would say is this: I want to give you, because we always do the football analogies here, I'm actually going to give what I think is a pretty fire one, which is, bro, last season, if you remember what happened last season, crucially, not this one, to Tottenham Hotspurs, one of the big 6 clubs, right, that we have in English football. Last year was considered really bad because in the Premier League they were irrelevant, weren't they? But if you remember, they did win that fucking cup, mate. And the whole reason why, if you ever watched them play, both results made perfect sense. Because if people don't know, what they basically did was they played like they were Real Madrid. Like, they just went for goals constantly. And it's not a joke. As a result, they would score loads of goals, but they'd also lose like loads of games, you know, like 4-3 and ridiculous scores at that. Now, what's hilarious about that, Pimp, is that was terrible for the Premier League. So if you see like how Arsenal just won now, Premier League actually isn't about goals that much. It's about things like having a really good defence and just winning 1-0. It really is some like Jose Mourinho Park the boss shit. But what's funny is the style that Tottenham Hotspurs played, at least, this is why their manager is legendary for this, is actually pretty good for being like a fluky cop team though. Because again, if you only have to win like 2 legs or something, actually just scoring goals, even as a bad team, could be a decent strategy to just fluke your way through. So the point I'm making is this: even though this season also Spurs sucked, they didn't have any of that, mate. They had none of that, like, flair and, like, oh, this will be exciting. At least, hey, you know what? There's a punch. Now they're just a bad team, mate. They fired that manager, and now the squad they have is just like, the joke is, if they'd have been relegated, it would have been historic because it's Spurs. But if you actually looked at how they played, you'd be like, they're just a bad team, yeah? That's totally fine. If you watch them play, they had a hard time scoring goals now, mate, and winning games. So I would make the same analogy, because if you remember, if you go back to the Twists, Liquid, bro, they weren't doing any placings either. They weren't relevant at majors. They themselves, by the way. But if you remember, what was bizarre about that, Liquid, was people still did play individually well. People like Twists would bag out in the game. Nerds was pretty decent when he first joined. They also had actually upset potential. If you remember, bizarrely, actually, they used to play a bunch of good games against teams like Vitality or like top squads, even if they didn't win them. So, like, I could at least, the difference is, I could be delusional about a team like that. I can find reasons, and it's a lot easier to look at one of those teams, even though it didn't work, and think if I had one piece, maybe that elevates us. This one, it really just has so few qualities that are redeeming for me that, yeah, I've got to say, mate, I don't think they're going to do anything this major. And even more important, like, I actually hope, a bit like that thing with FaZe last year, where I actually thought it would have helped them if they'd just gone out in that stage one. They'd got weird. The joke is, if you're a FaZe fan, you surely agree with me now, you'd probably have Carrigan still if you'd actually just made those cuts after that major. Instead, that whole season's the reason Carrigan doesn't play in FaZe anymore. So if I were them, I would just take it like that. As soon as you get eliminated, just, it's time to swallow the fucking harshest pill of all time and understand, yes, unfortunately, probably half this team has to go. This isn't even just a one-player job, but like half the team has to go. I don't even pretend to know who you would get, but that's that's also why I say I put the coach in there, because get someone who has a vision. Get a guy who actually has. Again, it could be an Ash type person. Get someone who at least would be able to give you a list of people who could join the team. Because again, my problem also with Team Liquid is I still think of it as Team Liquid, mate. Like, I don't think they should be going, oh, what's in the bargain bin here in Russia in tier 2? You're Team Liquid, for fuck's sake. You should be the ones that are going like, oh, is there actually like a world-class name available who, like, I'll give you a mad example. Let's say some of those weird rumours everyone always like fantasizes about, like Frozen goes to fucking Na'Vi. Well, then you should be in line for someone like him, mate. Then you take that player, that's another quality player that people know, and you make the team round. That's what I would hope. Sadly, also, I do worry. I want to know what you think about this that's going on in the team. I do kind of worry that this is going to be one of those ones where it's like, hey, welcome, Rain, you know, the one where they were like, Rainwaker and Patsy, and you were like, who? Because, you know, I'm scared it's going to be one of those, Pip. That's why when people say cut the team, it's like, who are we recruiting, though? Who are we bringing in?
Yeah. But you're mentioning the biggest issue right there, because yes, they are Team Liquid, and yes, you'd argue they have still a high, you know, and strong budget to attract certain players. But who would join them? Like, who would?
Oh, it's a cursed project right now. Absolutely, yes.
Exactly. So unless you believe that you're the guy who can build the project, then what's the attraction to even joining Team Liquid outside of the maybe a little bit of extra dollars on your bank account on a monthly basis? But those you can win, you know, by actually attending tournaments and doing well if you want to. I don't know, to be completely honest. I also do think it's one of those where if you're Liquid, like, and if you're the management of Liquid, and in general, I think that's one of the side consequences of VIS that we haven't really spoken too much about as well. If anything, there's been no better time to be a bang average player. I know I made the same case, you know, for AWP players. It's the greatest time to be average, because there's no one to replace you, right? So even if you're a guy like Ultimate in Team Liquid, who's been clearly a guy that was supposed to be replaced, you know, maybe a year ago, but given that he's doing somewhat okay at times and there's other issues, and by the way, probably the hardest position to find someone competitive in right now, he gets to stay, right? So it's never been, and I'll say this again, it's never been easier to be a bang average AWP player. Same goes for some of those players on teams who are in the VIS system right now. The VIS are sort of protecting bang average players in the sense that you cannot just, you know, remove 3 players and then build a new project, because then you have to start all over with VIS. Then you have to pull off 100 Thieves, right? You see it with BC game right now. The reason they're playing with the coach or assistant coach in Scrong or whatever that may be is because they bought that Portuguese core, right? And for a prolonged period, they couldn't replace too many of those Portuguese players without losing the core of the team and losing the VS standing, without having to start all over, etc., etc. Well, now I read like one of those explainers on Twitter where it's basically been explained to me, again, as a guy who doesn't know VIS that much in depth, that at this point BC game carries so much negative rate in terms of negative losses and negative points that it would be better for them just to kick everyone, you know, and build a new team around Simple and Electronic. And it's going to be the same case for Team Liquid. They're currently ranked number 39 or 43, depending on when you're watching this video, in the VIS, which is terrible, right? They're not getting invites to any of the big tournaments. If they don't do well at the major, if they don't get, let's say, 5 wins and make it to stage 2 and win a couple of games in stage 2 against good teams, they're not even getting invites to the PGL events, you know, or some of the tournaments with 24 teams, etc., etc. It really takes a lot for Liquid to climb back. So they stand at a point now where they have to seriously consider whether it's worth it to just, as you said, like blow up the entire team and start from all over, which means 0 VIS, which means bringing up a new core through the ecosystem, something the Thieves are trying to do right now. And let's be honest, when was the last time we saw 100 Thieves at a big event? That's taking a bit of time, you know, and that's long to be out of the window for a team like Team Liquid. That's too long for a club like that. Even read that the EWC invite, I think, risk at missing that, or they have to go through the open qualifier to be part of the EWC. And if there's one thing I know from following the Liquid guys and having a bit of, I guess, behind the scene information about that, is that EWC and being, you know, one of the clubs that fight for the title in there is mega important for Liquid, mega important for the budget, and mega important for how much money they can even invest into Counter-Strike. And now it could be that the Counter-Strike team is not even entering the EWC tournament to help Liquid win that club championship, to help Liquid then reinvest into the Counter-Strike team. So personally, I'm afraid that Liquid may look at the Counter-Strike team and be like, listen, I can't justify spending that much money anymore. So the next thing we're going to do is to sign Wayne Walker, to sign Patsy, to do some of those signings where it's just cost beneficial. You know, they may be slightly worse, but what's the difference for Team Liquid between being number 20 in the world and number 25 if being number 25 is at half the price at this point, right? So I think there's some serious discussion and some serious thinking going on within Team Liquid as to how they want to progress. Because I'll be honest, they can't attract the big names. They can't sign big players. They no matter how much money they would offer to a guy like Kerrigan, I cannot imagine him, being like, "Oh, Liquid is gonna be my last project." How would Liquid go to Frozen as an example if he's even willing to leave FaZe at this point and be like, "Frozen, you want to come play for Team Liquid? You can join up with Elish again." And there's no attraction whatsoever. Yes. Even in the coach, even as you said, even if you then signed Ash, or you signed, I don't know how you get some of the bigger coaching names, or I don't know, Sonic gets let go from Falcons and Liquid is blowing cash and so on. At least that gives you attraction power. At least that gives players a reason to join the team. But the only reason I would join Liquid right now was to play with Elish, because I'm like, that's a known quantity. But as we spoke about already, he's dropped out massively as well. So there's nothing. There's nothing that is attractive to Team Liquid right now outside of the name, and that'd be the same thing as joining Fnatic or joining Astralis at this point, just for the sake of the name value. And trust me, as much as the fans don't like to hear it, the players, they don't give a fuck. Whether you call Astralis, Team Liquid, or Fnatic, if you're not an attractive team, and if I don't believe my career is gonna be beneficial to be here, not gonna sign for a team. So I think Liquid are screwed, to be completely honest. Regardless of making stage 2 or not, then they have to do even more. Make stage 3 at the very least, and then we can talk about, okay, maybe all you needed was a bit of time with Melps, a year and a half with the core, and then Melps coming in, and then that changes the conversation. But there's nothing pointing in that direction. Obviously, we can't know for sure, but I see no signs of life, as you also described.
Yeah, also, by the way, you'll notice, I didn't mention even some of those players. I would immediately remove both Ultimate and Chu here. Maybe even the coach as well, because as I said, I think all those people, if you look at both at their form of play and what the potential is, there just isn't any. Right now, the biggest problem Chu here has is no version of Liquid that had him in, beyond, I don't know, one tournament, maybe that Dallas event at the beginning or something. He's had almost no events where they had any placing that was even worth talking about. So my big issue is this. Normally when it's IGLs, my whole take, whether it's Alexi B or Carrigan, the reason I'll defend them is it's I just think maybe they don't have the right players or whatever. But that still sometimes even means, like Carrigan and FaZe, still sometimes means you have to go though. The question is, can we get players that work for you? So in this case, another problem you have, I think, is this. If you look on paper, if you go back the last couple of years, actually, Shuhei and Elise should be draws, mate. They should be people that you want to go and play with. One, I don't believe that's the case. And then two, and this is even worse, it's implied, if you think of some of the problems those players have had in their teams, that they're not even the sort of players that have the social thing of they could reach out and be like, hey, come and play with me, mate. Actually, these seem like two of the more, I won't say antisocial, but not as popular players. Elise, for what a legendary player he is, I don't think he has that pull, mate. He certainly doesn't seem like the guy that DM'd someone like, hey, come play with me, because I think everyone's heard the stories that he's sort of fucking North American Shocks and you just have to do everything his way, otherwise he gets upset, So anyway, let's move on from Liquid, because they are just a bobbing to talk about. I'll tell you what, I'm going to pick a team now. And actually, I think one of the more interesting ones in stage 1 is Team Big Clan, the famous German team. And I'll give you a few reasons why. First of all, I'll tell you one reason why, even though I'm sure a lot of people, when I saw that first report that was BlameF to join Big, I was like, what? Because first of all, it said as IGL, so he was going back to that role, which obviously it had been somewhat cursed when he was in Astralis. It's basically why they kicked him from Astralis. I'll never believe anyone who tells me he was bad. His numbers got worse because the whole team was bad, that super team, and he was trying to IGL as well. If anything, I still think to this day that was one of the most short-sighted cuts ever, because as a player, one of the reasons why I actually think this move, even though it sounded mad, now makes a lot of sense in why BlameF did it, is because first of all, if you look, the Fnatic team he was in never really fully got going. It would always get close to, it would even get in the odd tier 1 tournament, but then they'd he would have a good performance, but they'd lose, and they never really got together as a squad. And the joke now is, if you look at the current Fnatic, they're less relevant even the Big. So actually, aside from the org, on the orgs that sounds like a massive downgrade, actually he did do a fairly deft sort of side grade into his team's better now. His team's at the major, Fnatic's irrelevant, they're just some fucking Ukrainian team now. So what I will say is this, the reason it actually ended up being quite a clever move though, I'm still not sure about the IGLing angle, because listen, I'll phrase it politely. Just from hearing BlameF talk and seeing his teams over the year when he IGLs, I just don't get the sense he's a super tactically deep individual. And I don't even mean that to be insulting for intelligence. I mean as in I think to him, and this would make sense if you think who he is as a player, I think he likes the game to be reasonably simple, and then you make the moves individually as a player. You do a smart player, or you play off information. A lot of modern players, actually, that is the way they see the game. They think some people go too far with tactics. So to me, in this team, I know that it's Big big clan, so people are going to think it's super tactical. But I actually, I've always thought as an IGL, it looks to me like he's one of those ones who calls a little bit around his own game. It just seems obvious, because he's such a good player individually. And I don't necessarily know it's the best style. With that said, though, here's why it's a good fit. Because, bro, if there's one thing BlameF is really famous for, it's what he made his name off. It's being a grinder. And Big as a team is actually really famous for being the ultimate grinders. Like, one of the things I've even wondered about over the years when I've heard the stories, because, by the way, it's the culture thing in the team. It doesn't matter who the coach, the IGL, all these people are always in Big Clan. It seems like they recruit people who have a really strong work ethic and want to just work all the time. And obviously, Big Clan itself has been outside of the tier 1 for quite a while now. So for years, they've grinded online tournaments and smaller lands. And they're even one of those teams where you don't even hear them whine that much. Like if my boy Snappy in an IP or in a bad spot, he'll let you know if he thinks the system doesn't work and there should be a quiet. Big Clan, they just fucking get on with it, mate. They just put their head down and just get to work. So I do think, actually, though, a bit like some of the old BlameF teams that grinded, like the Complexities, etc., it seems like it's worked, though, mate. It's actually gotten the team into pretty good shape. And coming into the Major, they're one of those teams that has like 1 million reps and played loads of maps and games. And also, I'll give people a couple of other angles. One detail that, as an analyst, I fucking love this when teams do this, but I don't know whose idea it was in Big. But if you've ever watched Big, they're one of those teams that don't do the standard, we always permaban this, and they do a rolling veto. Oh, bro, I'm in love whenever I see that, because if you do it properly, that is a way to literally make your team have something like, I'm going to get off the top of my head, I'll give you a random number. Say, I don't know, say 10 to 20% of the time, you just get a better matchup in a veto than you would otherwise. Whereas actually, the joke is, even some of the great teams in the world, if you see like an Aurora veto, before I even look at it, mate, I could tell you 3 or 4 teams that they're going to do really well against. And 3 or 4 teams they better stay away from, no matter what the level is, just from the veto alone. So that's already quite interesting. And at this level of the Major, that in theory means there's no one can really ever tower over you. You can always match up somewhat with everyone. Then you look at the players. First of all, BlameF himself is good again. He puts in the hours, he grinds. It's funny, he is one of those people where you see him in real life. He's obviously the same in real life. He's been fucking built and henched for years and years and years, because he obviously puts in the effort and just grinds. And one of those people who can just go and do that. So first of all, I have respect for that, but I also think it's shown in the game. But it's not just the BlameF show. Like, look, while I will say people are going to look at this roster and see names like Tabson, it's like, guys, that's like seeing the name Rain or Crims now. Like, yes, they were some of the greatest players ever, but that was a long time ago now. Like, I don't really expect Tabson to be a big fragger now. That point in his career's been and gone, you know. But the actual name I want to point to, because I refuse to just give up on this person right now, is their AWPer, is the Belarusian player Grix.
Yeah.
Now, if people don't know, yes, first of all, he clearly has talent. If you watch him, the eye test tells you this guy has fucking skills. But also, I'll just tell you this, Pimp. I just heard from too many people. Like, to me, what's funny is when people do that thing where they go, just get a Molodai. I've made this point on Twitter. It's like, yeah, but you mean the Molodai we now know that we see like owning everyone in massive stage matches? That's not even who Furia got. They just went off some like, you know, they saw him do some shit in a scrim one time or something, you know. That was a gamble itself. So my point is, actually signing a player like a Grix is getting a Molodai. You have to go through the gamble. And actually, that still looks like it could end up being good. All I'll say is I've heard a whole bunch of coaches, even after he joined those initial teams, where, look, it sounds like from one of those teams, I can't remember which one it was, a Game League or something, it sounds like maybe he himself was a bit spicy. He is Eastern European, to be fair. That's often just a culture clash, isn't it? But all I'll say is, when I talk to a bunch of coaches around that level, they were telling me like, oh no, he is a really good player. That'll be like a top AWPer one day. Like if you get to the right team and he puts in the practice. So that is like if you look at stage 1 of this tournament, mate, yeah, it's pretty light on the ground for AWPers. Like, this could be a very good chance for someone like that to pop off, have big numbers, and then big cans going through to stage 2. So and then lastly, the German element of the team, beyond Crimbo, who I do think was the best German player, they've got basically the rest of the best pieces you can have in the German team and in most big clan lineups. Like, they've had all these players before. Farvan's been there before, but he doesn't have to be the superstar, does he? JDC, actually, people don't know, sort of just a good sort of fill player. Seems like he has a good attitude. And at this point, you're just having Tabson to be a veteran, bro. So I actually think this team, I know it's also not a super sexy team because they haven't had any huge results. I actually think this team gets through, mate. Like, I think if I look at this field, they seem like they have enough quality. This should be a stage 2 team for me. Where's Pimp at on big clan?
I'm with you. I think it's funny that you picked Big, because I was just about to say, like, Liquid solution is by signing players like BlameF, by looking at teams like Big, you know,
it's a good gamble.
And sign players like BlameF. It's a good gamble, and it's like people, as you said, like the way you described his career, people have forgotten about BlameF, and he has had so much negative PR, you know, in terms of him being selfless and calling for himself, and in that Astralis super team, like, if it was his fault it didn't work out.
Yes.
Like, the more we know and the more that comes out from that time, you know, in terms of the personalities and what was going on, like, I refuse to believe that was all BlameF, you know. surely he played a part in it, just like everyone else, but it was almost laid out that it was, his fault that it never worked out, or he couldn't utilize the players and whatnot, which is ridiculous. And as you said, like, he's good, he's grinding, he's one of those players who's willing to put in the effort. And even in Fnatic, like, one of the reasons why Fnatic were close breaking through was because of BlameF, had occasionally some of the old school tournaments where he would be an EVP, MVP contender, depending on how far they'd go into the tournament. And he's done the same now for Big. And then, not to basically rephrase everything you said, I just add another layer to that in terms of stage one and where my belief comes from as well. Because as you described briefly, it's one of the teams who made the qualification for the major by grinding the VIS system, not by attending tier 1 tournaments, not even by attending tier 2 LAN tournaments, but by grinding it through online qualifiers and some of the tier 3 tournaments, and really selectively picking, okay, what sort of tournaments can we go to? Where do we have the best odds of winning? We saw them beat FaZe in that grand final, by the way, a tournament where BlameF had a rating of 1.40, I think, on average. Again, people forget about that because it's a shit tournament, but they played Magic. We saw how they did in Astana. They beat FaZe in a game FaZe had to win to qualify for the major. So as much as you want to downplay what Big and BlameF is doing, look at who they play and look at where their teams are competing afterwards, and tell me that that's not good enough to be competitive in stage 1 and be dominating in stage 1, which is frankly what I expect BlameF to do. Now, is Big as a team then good enough to make it to stage 2? That's where I'm like a bit in doubt. I have them in my pick'ems for some of the same reasons as you described right here. And even more so for the fact that they are one of the few teams in stage 1 who's really been grinding it out against teams similar to their own level. So we're not talking about a Gamer Legion who, they play tier 1 tournaments and they gain a fair few bit of their VIS points by playing against good teams, by playing against teams who are significantly better strategically and even from an individual point of view than most of the teams they play in stage 1, which is a different way of playing Counter-Strike. Like, it's a lot more loose, it's a lot more risky, it's a lot more taking gambles, taking chances. It's a lot more of those situations where if you're Snacks with all this experience, you're like, what the fuck? What are you doing? Like, what is this team doing? But it's so frustrating to be up against because what they're doing is quote unquote stupid or not the right way to play Counter-Strike, but it can catch you off guard and all of a sudden you find yourself in a 1-2 position instead of 2-1. And that's why I think, teams like Gamer Legion will risk being a little bit more vulnerable compared to Big, who are used to that, who are one of those teams who will do that and take advantage of it. So I think they're one of the more suited tier 3 teams in stage 1 to make it through. And I agree with you. We all have a bit of bias towards certain things. And, for a time, I was with you on Liquid as well. I think BlameF it's going to be one of those careers that if you ever get to do a talk with him or get to do an episode with him and in general get to dive into his career, like I think he's been misjudged and I think he's been misrepresented, and he personally has probably not cared enough to sort of like steer the PR image of him in a certain direction by being a bit of a troll. He engages with Twitter people in a fun way and doesn't really care and had to block it all out, but that also helps to some of those stories living its own life, where I find most of it to be bullshit. Most of it is something that is living on Reddit, started on Reddit, by some of those morons who think they know what's going on within a team, and then they write that in a well-articulated way, and then everyone else, upvotes it and jumps on board of it, whereas in reality, it's never really been the case. I think BlameF has been misjudged, misrepresented, and I think a team like Big already by now, what they've done by qualifying with the material they have and by rebranding, I think that's cool, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Big go to stage 2, and I wouldn't even be surprised if we see Big as one of those teams in stage 2 that can maybe be a bit annoying to go up against for some of the better teams. I don't have them going to stage 3. I don't have them, being a surprise of the major, but I think there's enough quality within that team and enough X factor and guys like BlameF and Griggs for that matter as well, who I also do think never really got a fair shot in Heroic, which is surely something they regret now that they don't have an Auber, to be completely honest. So I think there's enough of a good reason to bank on Big and be like, okay, they're one of the teams to look out for. Whether they do it in a 3-0, 3-1, 3-2 fashion, no clue, but I have them making through as well.
I don't think he would be mad for me telling you this, but basically the downside is this, Pimp. And sadly, this in itself is kind of cool if you're thinking like a movie character. It's admirable. It's just not really like advisable, if this makes sense. I have spoken to him about exactly that topic. I've basically told him ever since basically he had the hard times in Strauss, I've told him, mate, if I were you, I'd do like an interview. Basically like the one I just did with Dexter. Just do an interview where you address all the big things that people say. So you simultaneously address things like what went wrong in this team, etc. manager, and you know, if you think it wasn't you, you say it wasn't you. If you think it was you, you got responsibility. But also, you do the thing like I did with Dexter, where you address rumours like, if there's rumours like, are you hard to play with? Do you demand all those? Like, you address that just because it gives a chance that someone out there who was on the fence hears that and goes like, oh, maybe I give this guy a try. I'll just say this is the part I don't think he'll be mad about me saying. Unfortunately, he's like old school in that sense, Pimp. Like, he doesn't want to do it, even though, like, for me, that'd be a great angle to turn it around. Because his perspective is like, I want to let my play speak for me, so I'll just grind in the server, which, by the way, he's done, and then on some level it has spoken for him. But I don't think guys like him realise, like Dexter, I can just tell you, by the way, from talking to Dexter, he really didn't realise until now, basically, when he tried to come. Because here's what Dexter didn't realise, as a quick sidebar, is, I mean, he's even fucked this up on his social media mix. If you ever go to Dexter's Twitter, it says player for Team Falcons. He's not actually under contract anymore, bro. They actually released him. He's no buyout. My bio would say free agent, no buyout, like eager to play or something. You know, his problem is he didn't properly message to the world what his situation was. And he really did think, mate, because he used to be a really good player, that he could just sit there and as soon as he was available, everyone would come knocking on his door, and basically almost no one came knocking on his door. So I worry something similar about BlameF. Look, in this case, he's on a team, but I worry that he doesn't realise, like, even though to me, I think this career narrative is he sort of turned it around and proved that he was legit. The problem is, I don't know that in the same discussion. I'm with you. I'd put him on Team Liquid tomorrow, mate. He's even a guaranteed sort of performance player. But I don't know that, sadly, that Liquid even has him on the radar. They would just think, oh, he's that guy who used to play on Astralis. He's on bit. I don't know that they look at that part of the scene. So that part is a bummer. In fact, and I also agree, if his career ended tomorrow, he would go down as one of the most, like, misjudged careers I've ever seen, bro. I'll give you an example. Right now, in the last year or so, obviously you've had all these brilliant results for Furia, right? I always used to say the same thing. It's like, mate, the person I always felt so sorry for in that team was Keserato, because I used to watch him year after year after year, quite like a BlameF. They're also similar sort of players, by the way. Just have fantastic years as a rifler where you're just doing a really good job most games. You actually look like you're a top 5 sort of rifler, top 10 rifler in the world, year after year after year. We're talking like these guys have like a solid 4 or 5 years, mate, when they've done this. But because you just don't have the trophies, and in fact, you're often in some of their down periods, not even relevant in the tournaments, fans do just look, they're a bit like HLTV. They think the stars of Counter-Strike are the best players on the teams that play deep in the tournaments. Fans don't really want it to be that there's some awesome player on like the fucking team that comes last place or second to last. Like, that's just not how they view the game, unfortunately. They do reward success and they do punish not having team success. So sadly, I think he's being cursed by that. I've got another angle too, which we can use to segue into the next team, which is, I also agree with you though. Another detail about how VRS sorts stage 1 specifically is I actually think stage 1 is way trickier to judge than stage 2 and stage 3, and here's why. Because like I say, the bottom end of VRS is where it gets a bit squirrely, because as you said, you nailed it perfectly. You have teams that basically made it to this stage by just being in tier 1 tournaments and doing a little bit but not loads. That's why they're not in stage 2. Meanwhile, the other teams in this stage 1 are the ones where they weren't even in the tier 1 tournaments. They just came up from stage 3 or whatever, tier 3 or whatever we want to call it, and now they're sort of meeting in tier 2, tier 1.5, whatever you want to call stage 1. Well, the reason why that is significant to me, Pimp, is because actually that reason means, believe it or not, the less famous team might be more legit, and for the reason you just said. Because if I look in this field, actually, if I do look at a team like Big, another one I'd immediately look at is BetBoom. They're another one from that era. I would even say the joke is I haven't picked this team from our pick because I don't know the players well enough. Even maybe the Sinners esports teams. These are all teams that did what you just said. They basically proved we're the top of the lower level. We've fought our way through quite consistently winning against those teams. Now we're here at the major. We look at this field. It's like, this is quite a similar sort of field. Wait a minute. This is what I do every day. So actually, if I look at some of those teams, like I say, maybe not Sinners because I just don't know the players, but if I look at Big and BetBoom, I actually look at those teams and I'm like, bro, I'm pretty sure they beat almost every team in this group except, you know, maybe Game League or something, or maybe one that has a very specific veto. Meanwhile, if I go and look at what are much bigger names like Heroic, Bait, listen, these teams very rarely ever make a playoff of a tier 1 tournament. So the problem is, my brain tells me they're better because I see them in tier 1 tournaments. I see them sometimes have one good result. But, like, it's hard to really know, are they that much better than Big? And I'll tell you an example of a team I think is the perfect example of this. It's got to be NRG. Bro, NRG plays at tier 1, but they usually come last place. So it's like, what am I supposed to take from that? Like, again, being like, everyone saw this back in the old CSGO circuit. You had teams that used to get to the tier 1 tournaments, come last place. Then the next week, they'd go to a DreamHack Open, which was more like this, and they wouldn't win it. And you'd go, oh, wait, Are you just like good at sort of losing to the best teams, but not good at like beating tier 2 teams or whatever? So that's why I actually do think beyond the biggest names, there are some spice names here. So who do you want to go to next? Is there anyone like, have you got a out of left field pick here or someone you expect to be better than maybe other people do? Do you have any crazy pick?
A little bit recency bias on MIBR, but I actually liked a lot what I saw at CAC. Obviously, they bombed out, in the third place decider, couldn't get much done. But the way Insani played, I think he's sort of like building himself to be the next Caserado in a sense, where he's insanely good. Like if you never heard of Insani before, it's probably because you don't watch too much Counter-Strike. Yeah. Whenever he plays, though, whenever he's with MIBR, like he's insane. He was up until the point where they played the third place decider at the CAC. His average rating for the tournament was 1.54 or something like that. Like he was legit an MVP contender, despite maybe even finishing third in the tournament. Like, there was a world where he could have finished the tournament with a 1.6 rating, and the next one would have been 1.2. And at that point, like, do you award the MVP to a guy who finishes third, or the winning guy with a 1.2 rating that could have been Monacy or someone else? Like, I think that could have been an interesting, prospect to even have that conversation. Because I think individually, he was without a doubt the most influential player at the tournament. He was owning his opponents, and he's done that before. Like, he's a massive, massive talent, but he's also part of that whole Brazilian scene where it seems like once you sign a contract with a team, like you just stuck with that team forever, unless someone comes with $5 million and buys you out. And he's not quite at that level. Just yet. But I liked what I saw from MIBR, and I think MIBR, again, that's the whole, for me, the whole concept of this stage one, as you just, kind of encapsulated, that it's so close, it's so competitive, it's the same level, it's going to be the form of the day that's going to decide most of the matchups. It's who's going to come in more mentally prepared, who's going to have the best energy, who is a better fit in terms of the veto, in terms of the map pool going up against each other, who gets the luck of the draw as well, in terms of, as you said, there will be a couple of upsets in the best of ones, and then all of a sudden the simulator is going to screw you over, and then you're playing a team you wasn't necessarily expecting to play, etc., etc. So I think it's going to come down to those fine details, but I do believe that MIBR is one of those teams who can do well in something like that, because they may have the best player in the entirety of stage one, who I consider to be Insani. I think he has that ability as an individual to be better than everyone he's playing against, and that's sort of like having I'm not saying he's Donk, but for MIBR, he's having the same impact as Donk is having for Team Spirit. He's that much better than the rest of the team. And I think that's insanely valuable when you're in stage one, when you're in a close field of teams where everyone is equally good, everyone plays Counter-Strike at somewhat the same level, etc., etc. So what's going to make the difference? Well, that could be the one player that is actually significantly better than everyone he's going up against. And I think Insani is a good bet on a player that, let's say that you're doing the poly market or the Kelsey betting stuff, where it's like, what are the odds of him being the highest rated player in stage one? I'd say pretty high. That's how good he is. So for me, that's part of the reason why I think MIBR is a bit underestimated. But then again, a lot of it is recency bias. What I saw at CSE, on the other hand, that was the last time we saw any of the teams play heading into the major. So I think it's fair to put a bit of stock value into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, if people didn't know, the problem MIBR has is one of those teams that just plays in Brazil most of the time. They also, just before that, played the PGL Bucharest tournament. If you have a look who they lost to, they only lost to Astralis, finalist, by the way, and then 3D Max, and it was a close series. 3D Max is a pretty hard team at that level to beat. Like, aside from that, they would do decently. They beat Legacy, they beat BCK, they beat some squads that weren't bad. So
yeah, they signed LNC as well. The Swedish guy, they signed Klim as well. Like, they tried to actually break out of just being a Brazilian team recircling the same talent. So for that reason, they're also quite interesting.
Yeah, I also think that's the part that's underrated. Last year, when this squad existed, it was basically just the Insani show. Like, if he went really, really nuts, then you had a chance. But even when they added Klim, who, by the way, I think actually is in that Molodoi fucking Grix group for me, like, people are missing it. Remember, this guy was on G2 Ares, which was the fucking academy team. Like, I actually am really shocked, one, that G2 himself didn't give him a try. I assume Saw just said, I want some bias instead because he's my boy. But I'm also shocked that other teams haven't picked this guy up, because I've seen him have a bunch of games where he looks like he's a spicy opera, mate. It looks like he goes for it. Yep. And then lastly, the detail you just mentioned is probably the underrated one. LNZ, if people don't know, is an IGL. Like, that's actually the piece they didn't have in this team. Before, it was just a bunch of Brazilians. It looked to me like, if you ever saw how limited the map pool was, they just played like some standard CS and hoped Insani shot everyone in the head, basically. That actually gives me some hope that, one, if you keep a Russian and a Swede, you're just going to be an international team anyway. And then two, so you can, as in, you don't have to recruit Brazilians. And then so it gets around that problem of whatever it is. You know what's funny? When the Brazilians first got good in CS, yes, and Richard obviously knows a lot about sport and football. He pointed out that when he'd heard about these buyouts, that it was a similar problem to what had happened in Brazilian football, apparently, and that the whole reason in Brazilian football they'd put all these aggressive contracts in is because otherwise Europeans, because of Ronaldo and all those players, just used to come and they used to get everyone who was 12, and whoever you were, before you ever got to play in the best, Corinthians or whatever, you just immediately were on an academy team of Barcelona or fucking whatever squad, Man United, it could be any team at this point in time. So they did this as a form of protectionism to give the Brazilian league some talent. The problem is, though, you can see how in Counter-Strike it's gone completely the other way. It actually means that people don't escape the Brazilian team and ever get to have a career, especially because, unfortunately, it's actually had to go the other way, you notice. They've just, for whatever reason, beyond the Brave, the Coldzera's and the Fallens of the world, most of them don't want to go to an international European team. They want to be in a Brazilian team. So if anything, we've just had to bring the international to them, and that just seems like the new approach. But at least it means they've got an IGL, they can potentially recruit Europeans, etc. So there is some potential to this team. Obviously, a lot of it's mostly quite recent. Like I said, it's the last couple of tournaments. But I know what you mean. When I watched them play at CAC, I actually thought there's something to this team. Here's the difference. If I use that example I said of Liquid earlier, this team's exactly the sort of underdog team I like to watch, mate. They either hit really hard, like you're saying, and can win the game and have players. And by the way, someone like Insani's mad overqualified for stage 1 of the major. This guy could easily be on a better team. That's sexy to watch, mate. Let me see if this guy goes nuts in a game or Mirage or something. But they also have the flow where they can be really bad too. Just lose to a lot of teams. But no, I'm with you. I have them in my pick a bit for exactly that reason. Yeah, I actually even think it's kind of an interestingly GM'd squad. It's one of those ones that have taken some gambles, but maybe they've worked. Pick another team. Who we're going with now?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's for me. It's either between Bait and BetBoom, because obviously for Bait, they started off the year like shit. They had the whole thing where they played with an Arbor, then they changed that over to Sissy now and had terrible results. Whatever event they went to, they finished last. They never get anything done. But the last 2 events they played, I've watched them, I've covered them, and I've been somewhat impressed. NPL seems back in form. Sissy seems to be a player that has slowly but surely transitioned into understanding what it's like playing on a team from Counter-Strike. Clearly a big talent, mechanically very talented, but now also understands what it's like to play Counter-Strike at a team level, dare I say it. So I think Bait is probably one of those teams coming into this stage, being a little bit underrated, because we remember them for being, somewhat interesting last year and then fading out completely and then getting off to a bad start this year. So it's like they fade out at the end of 25. They start off 26 like shit, and all of a sudden they lose all their attention. But kind of, in the dark, they've been turning it around. They seemingly seem better and better. And I have them as a 3-0 pick in my pickings because someone had to be there. And I was really impressed with what I saw in Atlanta. And I was really impressed with what I saw in the last couple of tournaments from them, despite them not being a team that I think will make stage 3, or not being a team that is going to beat some of the top dogs. They do have experience from tier 1 and have done a good job. So they're one to keep an eye out for. BetBoom to me is interesting for the one reason I don't know what lineup they're going to come in with. Are they going to play with Flammers, who looked very, very good during IM Atlanta, beating Vitality, regardless of practice, no practice? That's impressive. Getting to a third place decider and getting to be part of the playoff in Atlanta is impressive. But are they going to play with Dilladis? Are they going to play with Flammers? And would I rather prefer them to play with Flammers actually than Dilladis, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's why they are a bigger a question mark to me. But in terms of who I expect to make it through, I have them both where, I don't know. I hope BetBoom plays with Flammers first and foremost. I think he's also one of those players where a little bit of, I wouldn't say mismanaged, but maybe he should have never went to VP, and Absolutely. He should have never played under Jame and be put into those positions, and that can ruin any good player. But then if he's as good as we think he is, then he would have been bouncing back in OG, or he would bounce back in BetBoom, which I think he showed glimpses of in Atlanta. So I would like to see Flammers get another chance with BetBoom at the major to see if what we saw in Atlanta was okay, Flammers is back. The player that people were, sending to G2. He was rumored to join G2 instead of VP. That's how good he was, on an international aspect of it. So I'd love to see him play with BetBoom. I'm just not sure whether they're going to play with him or they're going to play with Dilladis. Yes. As far as I'm aware, they have both, in. One is a 6th, the other one is a 5-man. So technically they can switch out as they like. So that's a bit interesting to me. The one underdog team I have to pick one would be Tyloo. I think Tyloo is one you should be afraid of. I think they have a lot of raw talent. They play Counter-Strike like Chinese teams sometimes play Counter-Strike, Asian teams play Counter-Strike. Not the smartest, a lot of the time you're like, what are you doing? The decision making from each individual is almost always questionable. But this time around, they've signed enough good players, signed some of those youngsters coming into it as well in Zero and Jamyong. I think they're good enough individually to kind of mask the fact that they may not be the smartest tactical team out there. And for that reason, I think Ty Lue is one to look out for. I don't think a lot of people have them to make it. I personally think that they are a team I wouldn't mess with in a 2-2 game.
Yeah, by the way, on the bait versus BetBoom thing, that's actually the reason why, if anyone saw on Twitter, I actually did like a rage tweet. It just irritates me now, like, because of this stupid thing we've done, where, because you get to list a sub, a lot of teams just use the sub as, like, essentially, like, as though it was Monopoly. Like, oh, I've got my one free transfer, even for the major squad, sir. And unfortunately, because of that, we all have to go along with the pretense, just like that time fucking Cadian got to play for Astralis when he shouldn't have been able to. We all have to pretend like, oh yes, here they are. They're just bringing their sub player in here. It's like, no, that's your real player. So what I hate about it, right, is to technically, as far as I can tell, them, there's no way to check who the actual real lineup is. You have to just go based on, I'm assuming, rumours and Telegram of fans who know who it is. Because same thing happened. Yep. I was just going off recent form. I actually thought the recent form with the standings looked excellent. Like, I was fucking with that team. That was kind of a fun team to watch. So I picked this team as one of my 3 zeros. But then I saw some people saying, like, but actually Flames, who was one of the players I think has good potential and actually is overqualified for this level. I was like, they were like, he might not be playing though, maybe the latest guy's playing. It's like, well, first of all, how do we know? And then I tried searching online, and if you just do a Google search, the problem is in April there's news saying, but maybe Flammers couldn't play for the major. But as far as I can tell, you can't confirm it anywhere. So first of all, that's a bomber, and also it's also not a great sign if I'd rather you kept the standings than your real lineup, is it? Because the real lineup's all right, but I do think someone like Flammers adds a little bit of extra punch and spice that you don't get in the original squad you have. With that said though, I think even if they don't play with Flammers, they should still go through for me. And maybe, like you say, maybe you just don't pick him as the 3-0 because that's a little bit less guaranteed. But I actually think, yes, that is a pretty legit team. What I like about that team is it actually has the blend that I think you want the most at this level, like stage 1, which is you recognise a bunch of names. Now listen, people like Zorti are still good players, but actually the best part of the team is the players you recognise are decent still, and then it's people like Magiros who maybe you don't know the name of. He's probably their best player, mate. Like, actually, that's the way you want to pair up, like, older players with younger ones. You don't want it to be like the older players the star and then the younger players just his servant and some shitter player. You want it to be, it's a nice blend of players. So actually, for the level they're at, they've done a good job GMing that squad. I do think they'll be a very good team in this stage. Also on Bait's a good example, mate, of the failures of the likes of the Liquids of the world, because if I look at Bait, not a lot of sexy names on this one. Like, look, because I've watched this team ever since NPL joined it. NPL has been their best player the whole time I've ever seen this roster exist. He even has done it as the Agile and not as the Agile. It's the same numbers pretty much. Like, it just looks like a good player. As far as I can tell, he's actually in Bait on some, like, I want to play with the Ukrainians angle. Like, I'm pretty sure this guy could have gone to other teams since. Like if you ever saw, he's been around exactly this level for like a solid like year and a half now or something. And I'm sure everyone who ever played him was like, that's the best player and he's the one that you'd take. The obvious move, as you're talking about, is the gamble they actually took was removing Headtrick, who used to be their AWPer, and bringing the Sizzy guy. Now, I know what you mean. I can see why they went for the gamble, because the Sizzy guy, I assume, just has crazy hands in scrims or something. It looks like that sort of player. But actually, I'm with you. It wasn't until very recently he even had any good games, mate. When I watched them play this year, I was like, oh, I think he made the team worse. Like, before this, to me, your whole team was NPL's the best player, and Headtrick's like actually a not bad AWPer. He seemed like he put the hours in. He had some decent. He was nowhere near the Wonderfuls and all those players, but he was not a bad AWPer. He could get something off in a LAN game. So I was worried they'd fucked up. Actually, maybe that's not an issue now. The main thing for me with their team is I actually think they are a good example of like a real Counter-Strike teammate. Whenever I've watched any version of Bait play, it looks like they just put loads of scrim hours in and try and play a real style of CS, and they don't maybe have the massive name players to like cause huge results. But if you put this team into a tier 1 tournament, you're not usually going to think they come last place. Like, they're going to be a team that can mix it up. They might, like, they're the sort of team that get those bullshit moral victories. You play 3 maps against the top team, or you bring them close on a game. So actually, for this stage, I also think they should easily be getting through, mate. There's another one of those teams where, unless you get some really unlucky draw, or you get the most bullshit BO1 upset against you, you win the BO3s. Come on, this team grinds it out and just gets through. I'm with you. Those are the easy ones. On the Ty Lue one, I'll give you a little on that, Pimp, because you guys never got this in Source, because Source really was mainly just not only a European game, but it was actually just a limited few countries. If people don't know, by the end it was basically just Denmark and France. There was a bit of UK somewhere in there, and then the joke is the Germans think they were involved, but as somebody who worked for a German team, they were all fucking cheating their tits off, or just average as fuck at their own EPS lands, weren't they? That's a little bit of a shot across the bow there, but anyway, anyone who's from the old school knows what I'm talking about, and I am correct on that one. So the point is, in CS Source, though, you guys didn't get one of the cool things we had in 1.6, which was we really did have like a truly international scene where you could have tournaments not only anywhere in the world, but sometimes you went to them and there would be like a really good team from Korea. There'd be a team from China that was actually relevant, not like these ones we've had in CSGO and beyond. Like, essentially, think about what the Mongols do. We had teams like that, but they were from Asian countries. It was super exciting. And what used to be cool was we had teams like this exactly happen a bunch of times, where you look at the squad and it's like that team can be low tier 1. They can be in the tournament, but there's one player on that team who's actually like, who's he? And so in this case, it's obviously the player Jam Young, isn't it? That guy just is a stud, mate. I've watched a bunch of his POVs. Like, I can tell you one thing this guy 100% has, crazy fucking aim. Like, this is a really skilled player. And he's given me flashbacks of those eras when you had Solo on the Korean teams, and you had this guy Jungle on the Chinese teams, or later on you had Savage, you remember, even in CSGO, that guy was a star. You'd have this one player where it's like, your real problem, mate, is just that you just speak Chinese. Unironically, you don't speak English. You couldn't come to Liquid. You have to play ski playing a Chinese team, and at the moment, they don't have a good enough scene to give you a team. But hey, at least one thing I always appreciate about teams like that is, mate, usually those teams and that player are fully aware that's the situation, mate. They're fully aware that, like, this is Spurs and I'm Harry Kane, mate. We might not be the best team, but give me the fucking ball. I get to score. So one thing is, that's really good for upsets. Like, if you give this guy his map and he gets rolled on the opposite, you're going to get a lot of fucking good frags. Like, it's going to be a baller game. So I'm with you. I also actually have them as one of my last teams, like, sneaking in on the pick'em for the same reason. Because I actually went and looked at the simulator and I was like, bro, obviously on paper, I would obviously immediately, just from my heart, take a Liquid or something like that over a team like this. But I went and looked at who they were playing and I was like, actually, at worst, they're in all these games. In fact, some of them I might even mildly edge them to them. So, yeah, I'm with you. I actually think Ty Lue sneaks through, because obviously the reason I'm bringing this up is I do think a lot of people, and it's not a bad system, the second there's a pick'em, specifically Pimp, they just go, well, who the fuck watches Asian CS? And then you just decide, right, am I putting Chinese teams in? There's not even a Mongolian teams, or Mongolian teams, or the Australians. And if anything, I think the Australians only escape because they speak English and we all know them. Like, that's about it. Or some of them used to be on Renegade. So realistically, sadly, I actually think some people, if they don't watch them, will just think Tyler who's going to come last place. Like, I don't think they will, actually. Yep. I think they're an example of a team where even if they don't get through, they'll cause some other team headaches, mate. Like, again, like I say, there's certain players here that you're way more familiar watching in Tier 1 in Europe, but the Jam Young guy might smack that guy up, mate. He's for real.
Speaking of last place, O3 picks. Yeah, O3 picks. I mean, there's a couple of teams. Like, I think the cool thing about Stage 1 is when I look at all the teams as well, is that I can make a case for all of them almost to be competitive. Almost. There's one team that pisses me off, though, and that's the gaming gladiators, you know. The whole thing with Fur, you know, and I really appreciate, first and foremost, I appreciate Fur and his career. I appreciate his openness. I appreciate the fact that he's honest about everything he's saying. But what he basically said is that he can't live life as a professional Counter-Strike player. Yes. He's not interested in practicing. He's not interested in doing the grind, all that kind of stuff, which is fair, you know, being bluntly honest about it as well. Yeah. Do what you want, exactly. And you made enough money and you look good enough to have a career on Instagram, whatever the fuck you want to do, right? Why the fuck would you sign him if you're gaming gladiators? Why would you waste everyone's time bringing back Fur for a month for the major, and then after the major having to find a new player anyway? Like, it's like, at that point, what you're telling me, that the messaging is that you care more about the brand Fur, you care more about the flashiness of Fur. You do not seriously believe that Fur is the player that gives you the best odds of not going 0-3 or making it to stage 2 of the major. And for that reason alone, I have a problem with that team, you know. And I get it, it's more nuanced than that, and maybe they were limited in who they could choose, but you can't tell me that you can't find another player from the Brazilian scene that is not better than a guy who's openly saying, I don't want to touch Counter-Strike because I don't want to practice. It's fun playing tournaments. Maybe going to be fun traveling to a major. Ooh, I can get a sticker. Can I get a bit of money? Cool. Other than that, I don't give a damn. You know, why is that the guy you bring into the tournament? And for that reason alone, I put them as an 0-3 pick in my calculations, because that's also going to reflect on some of the players. I refuse to believe that guys like Henny and Luken and the other, like, I refuse to believe that they're in it 100%. If anything, they're just in for the ride, you know, having a good time with Fur. Old mate of his, you know, Henny and Fur, they can probably have a lot of good fun, you know, back from the Imperial days or whatever it was called, SK Imperial, you name it. And if that's the mentality you're coming into stage 1 at the major, you're going to get smacked. Like, as we just described, you have teams like Big who are grinding their ass off. You have teams like Ty Lue who are grinding their ass off. You have Sinners who had to work their way up through Tier 3 Counter-Strike, grinding their ass off. You're not going to beat them if you're coming in on a bit of a holiday mentality. So that's my 0-3 pick, at least one of them, and I just wanted out there, that I appreciate Fur, I appreciate his openness, and I sincerely hate whoever made that decision to bring him in, because I think it's just taking the piss at everyone.
Here's the problem, Pimp. I do actually totally agree with your sentiment, but I have an angle on this, and it goes like this. Right? The reason I agree with your sentiment is, this is why actually I used to hate when we had the RMR system, because I'm sorry, if you actually are like America's or Oceanic teams, fairly, when we talk about all the VRS things, we mean Europe, the main region that was the hardest to get qualified through. Actually, there's not enough good teams in those other regions. You can sneak in even as somebody team that's not a proper team playing proper CS. So the problem I have is this. The reason I never wanted the RMR system is the RMR system, much like the famous drillers thing, actually did promote making one-off teams just for the RMR, because the joke was it was like a lottery, wasn't it? If you get to the major, you get the stickers, which is basically the lottery ticket winning, and then you get maybe not millions anymore, but you get hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then if you're a cynical org, you just go, lol, we got the money, and then who gives a shit about the rest of the season? See you for the next RMR in 6 months, and we'll try it again. We'll pick up another player and do it again. But that way we don't have to, actually spend that money in the scene, right? The problem I have is that this sort of move is like that, because as you say, this move is only for this tournament. In fact, his messaging even makes it clear, like, it's not like I'm doing a comeback, and if this goes really well, hey, maybe now I'm a pro again. He's making it clear, like, lol, I'll just play like as a ringer almost, like a stand-in, like an old fucking lad. And, can you come with us? Our fifth's dropped out. It's almost like that, isn't it? So the reason why I think it's bad is because, it shows no forward-facing vision for the future. Like, I'm supposed to believe this opportunity to go to the major is Gaming Gladiators now is, one, going to win some VRS points, two, prove it's a real team, and then in the next season, later this year, I get to see them play some proper tournaments, and maybe I see them at one of those smaller PGLs or one of these like tier 1.5 lands, and then finally they're working their way through the scene. This just looks like you just throw it at the wall for this event, and as you say, it's going to be a different team afterwards anyway. And I think I know why they've picked Fur Pro. Here's why. Because actually Fur did one of the better jobs of any player I've ever seen at leaving without ever looking bad in the game. He didn't do that thing that all my favourites, mate, Sharks, they all waited way too. They waited at the end, mate, when they in the game they looked bad. The stats were bad. If you remember, his last team was that Imperial team with Fallen, right? Yeah. And if you remember, he was easily the best player in that team. True, listen, this was like 4 years ago, but he was the best player in that team. He still had like his mechanics. He still looked like and even in that team, the rumour was he already didn't play the game anymore. Like he just turned up. It was the others that were like living and dying. Like, this is the last dance. He was just like. Because if you notice, the other thing about Fur is, this is why I can tell why Brazilians love this guy. He's a man's man, bro. Like, he's not even doing that thing like all these kids now with the looks max. He's not thinking about all that, bro. He just has like mad fucking masculine energy. You know what I mean? Like, he is a Chad. He absolutely is. And if you look at his style of play historically, who doesn't fall in love with that style of play? It's fucking dope, isn't it? He actually was also a fucking man's man in the game too. He's a beast on some fucking like Achilles shit, just running in there, killing everyone, not caring. So here's the reason I bring all this up, Pimp. Because if some team naively was to be like, look, we can't bring our real roster, but we could bring this guy in for one LAN. That's like the ultimate player that you dream just walks in, like no practice, fucking leather jacket, finishes a cigarette, puts it out in a fucking, in a thing, trash can next to him, puts the game on, lots of my sensitivity, yeah, fuck it, 1.5, whatever, and then still drops like a 30 bomb, and you're like, how does he do it? Fuck it, he's still got it, guys. Like, it's unlikely that happens, Pim. That is just a fantasy story. That's why that would be in my anime what would happen. So it's not likely it will happen, but I can see how if you're a team that isn't playing proper CS, you haven't got a good project, you could fantasize that's it. And then also, as you say, let's be real, if you want to be cynical, it's also a famous player. I imagine that'll bring some attention from the Brazilian scene and make some people want to support you. You might even get the odd free tweet out of like Fallen or something like that when they're watching stage one. Because by the way, I've seen enough rodeos, Pimp. They're going to do that tweet, Fallen and Cold Zero. They'll be doing this. Wow, great job, guys. Go Fur. They'll be doing that one where they pretend to support everyone else. So I know what you mean. Put it this way, this team is not a bad pick'em. I didn't have 0-3, but they're not a bad pick'em. Okay. My problem is this. To me, I'm actually shocked because to me, I think Thunder Down Under should be everyone's 0-3. The other 0-3, it's fine. Pick the other one as you want. I picked Sharks, which some people tell me is wrong because I just don't know the players. People tell me that team's not bad actually, and maybe I'm wrong and I'm getting it for... That one, okay, that's my gamble. But at Thunder Down Under, I could instantly, mate. I was so, like, the second I saw them, I was like, locked, 0-3 locked, like, immediately. Because there's just no reason for me not to. Essentially, as far as I can tell, Thunder Down Under is a bad version of players who used to be good in Renegades. And the only reason they qualified was some of that shenanigans where I think they were just playing like lads in Australia or something, weren't they? Like, it was one of those ones where it's like, it's not even that I know the team. I just have no reason to believe they're any good at CS and that they should even be it again. We all want to laugh at people like FaZe Clan. Mate, the FaZe Clan with Carrigan would be way better than Thunder Down Under. Like, remember, there are levels no matter where you qualify from. So I do think for 0-3, by the way, it's a hard pick for some of them, though, because, again, you notice what you're doing with this level of VRS is. It's basically regions we don't watch or teams that don't go to... Like, I'll give you an example. One of the teams that always tortures me in this stage of the major, mate, is that Linvision Gaming. Yeah, I can't get a read on them, mate. Because here's the difference. Unlike the Tai Lu team, they don't have, like, the one obvious superstar player. Like, I think the Starry guy's all right, but I've never thought he was... Or Zaka. I think the Zaka guy was the one that was the best player. Even he's not like Jam Young. But then also, mate, their form's all over the place. Sometimes they get the odd upset for a Western team. Sometimes they're just dead last, zero chance to win. So I do think the 0-3 was trickier beyond Thunder Down Under, personally. Because in your case, you're basically punishing Game of Gladiators, right?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Linvision was kind of weird because they went into CAC, domestically on I think it was 18 games in a row won, a massive win record. And I know that's domestically, but you're killing the Asian team.
Still winning,
beating, Chengiz Warriors. You beat Tai Lu a couple of times as well. And you're like, if you win 18 games in a row, I don't care whether you're playing plumbers or what you do, you're still a good team, And then they got absolutely smacked by the Mongols, beat NIP in a close series as well. And I don't know what that says about NIP or if it says more about Linvision. Then lost to Paravision in a big crisis again. So in terms of like just describing what you said right there, all over the place, a team with an 18-game win streak gets smacked by the Mongols 13-3. Then they beat NIP, seemingly a decent European team who should be punching above their weight or should be better than they are. And then they lose 0-2 in a very clear game to Paravision, who's probably never been worse than they are right now. So it's like it is mixed signals all over the place, which is exactly why you can't have them as an 0-3, because they will have a game where they just go nuclear, where they just win by running around and getting off to a good start, winning the pistol, converting, getting rifles first, basically, and then run over the opponents. And they'll have games where they lose and you're like, what the hell are you doing? So I can't justify having Linvision as an 0-3 pick either, but I get what you're saying. Essentially, that's my main takeaway from stage one. If you want to kind of round it up, I see 12 teams who all I could make a case for could potentially make it to stage two, but I only see 4 teams, maybe 5 in contention to be the 0-3 pick. So I think it's very even, and that's where VRS, as you described in the beginning of the episode, has really done its job. It's making sure that each stage makes sense in terms of bringing in teams who are on an even level, which should make for exciting games, which should make for a lot of, close games, but also makes it so we don't have to face the spirits and some of those teams, in stage one that we have seen previously, which, name value makes it a bit less interesting, dare say it, but I think in terms of actually watching the games and seeing some of those teams develop and seeing guys like Insani, seeing guys like BlameF, at the very least, we get to build up the momentum slowly but surely. So we ramp it up for stage 2, we ramp it up for stage 3, and then you have a bang of a playoff instead of constantly having to we see one of the teams in stage 1 now that could be part of the playoff, let's see how they do. And it's just a little bit far-fetched to keep that storyline going for 2.5 weeks. So I actually prefer it this way. And then people and in their mind, is it the real major, stage 1 of the major, compared to the old times where there were only 16 teams? I don't give a damn about that. It is what the major is now, and I think it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's also why, like I said, I actually sort of like the way VRS is sorted, because it also gives each team generally a realistic career path. So in this particular tournament path, I mean like trajectory. So basically in this tournament, if you make it through stage 1, now your team that's like just getting to stage 2 would be the accomplishment. You're not really going to do anything, like we say. You're not going to make a deep run. But that means stage 2 now becomes your real test. Like, can you actually sneak out of that one? Probably not even 3-0. And then similarly, it's only really once we get to stage 3 that I'm looking at these are the teams that can actually win the tournament. They can do so. But then similarly, the other reason it's going to be cool is, unlike that nonsense with FaZe last year, if this year any of these teams, even in Game Legion, if any of these teams makes a run from stage 1 to stage 3, and if they want to go really crazy, the playoffs, then you'll know they really did something. It won't be like, as you say, that it was just a team that was really good in the circuit, but they fucked up the RMR and went 3-2, and then they just had to start in stage 1, but they always should make it through. So I agree. I actually think the pick'em is also now way more interesting. Like, there's a lot of, I think once you get past the top 2 or 3 names, there's a lot of teams you can make a case for, as you say. It depends who they're playing, depends what you think of the current form of the players. Some of them maybe made roster moves. So yeah, I actually think this is it's not a sexy stage, but it's actually an interesting one with a lot of like intricate levels, and I imagine a lot of fun matchups. So we will be back to do around stage 1, going towards stage 2 in the future episode of Counterpoints.